Thank you. Where's Rachel? Great job. It's such a refreshing joy. You know, interesting. Our speaker today, Abbey Davis from the Spear School of Business. 1989. I'm in my third year of trying to destroy Chris's university spirit. And Brett Stokes calls me up and has me come speak to a junior high class he has one day a week for a couple of months. I met a young man named Evan Davis, and he and I kept in contact for years, off and on. And I ran into him in 2010 in Perkins Restaurant in November. And I see him and he says, "Hey, I want you to meet my new wife." And there's this huge table of Pittsburgh Steeler fans, all dressed out in Pittsburgh Steeler. And Abby, they had been married the night before. Now, what in the hell Evan's doing taking her to Perkins Restaurant the day after? I've got no idea. But anyway, she's a Pittsburgh / Morgantown native, and came here after. Did you graduated from high school there? Yeah, and then came to Oklahoma. Her family moved to Stillwater. So Abby also, she's working on her PhD, and she was the 2016 Outstanding Young Alumni of the Spear School. So Abby, come on up.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so we were born and raised in Pittsburgh. We've been in Oklahoma for almost 20 years. I'll share a very quick story about someone here in this room of why we're never leaving Oklahoma, and specifically Stillwater. So my parents have retired here too. My dad is a Vietnam vet. He's been having a lot of health implications due to Agent Orange exposure from the Vietnam War. And he is just my everything. And so I love spoiling the heck out of him on Father's Day. And he loves baseball. So I said, "Come on, Peepaw, we're going to go to a baseball game for Father's Day." And we go up. I said, "We'll just buy tickets there." And there's this gentleman named Scott that says, "Are you looking for tickets?" And I said, "Yes, we are." And we got the best seats to a baseball game than what we've ever seen. And it was a wonderful Father's Day. So I don't carry cash, but I would have given a happy buck for that. And I'll know for next time. So thank you so much. And that's why we love Stillwater. I know you did. Yes, it was a wonderful time. So thank you all for having me here today. This is a topic that I'm certainly passionate about, which is the workforce. We did a study I'm going to tell you just a little bit about that we've heard a lot of good feedback from. I'll warn you though, those of you that are business owners, entrepreneurs, managers, I may tell you some things today that you don't like, and I'm sorry. I'm just going to tell you the truth and how it is, and we'll talk about it how we go forward from here. So here is a little bit of our roadmap today. We'll talk about the status quo of how we work, some key takeaways from our study, considerations for how to move forward, and then thinking like a scientist. But first, the status quo of how we worked has really been shattered, right? I mean, the past 2 years has completely turned how we work upside down. And there's been a lot of really cool innovation coming out of that. I remember here in Stillwater, one of the first things I saw was when Meditations, they couldn't cater events because there were no events, but they were doing those family pickup meals. Remember that? I don't think it's something they're still doing, but I thought, what a creative way to pivot your business to survive in unfortunate times. What keeps me up at night is as I talk to employers, I do a lot of work with companies through the Spear School of Business, as a lot of people are anxious to get back to where we were, back to where things were before the pandemic. I agree. I want to go there too, but a lot has changed. And if we try to go back to exactly how we were before the pandemic, we're not going to have a whole lot of luck. But there's some good news. There's a lot of incredible resources that can help organizations figure out how to thrive moving forward. Specifically here in our state, we have a lot of great resources. If we avoid assumptions, if we think outside the box, think like scientists, I think we can do some incredible things. I'm working with a manufacturing company that you'll hear me reference quite a bit in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're doing some really cool stuff. And manufacturing is one of those industries that's kind of hard to get flexible with, right? You got to build widgets, you have to do the thing. So we'll talk more about that. And then really just rethinking and reimagining how we serve our customers and how we work going forward. I've never been more excited about the future. There's obviously none of us would redo the pandemic, but it gave us an opportunity to really rethink how we work and how we live. And so I'm excited that there's going to be opportunities going forward to do things differently. Let's talk about the obvious first. The pandemic impacted us and organizations in a lot of ways. There was a lot of stress and a lot of cost that was associated with employee stress, employee burnout from the pandemic. We know that working parents, working mothers, they were really impacted by the pandemic as we were trying to, switch to virtual school and homeschooling. Here you can see 76% of US adults said that they were experiencing burnout. So that's the obvious thing, right? We saw a lot of this from the pandemic. But what's not so obvious is we have these labor shortages, and everyone says, but we had the people before. Why do we have shortages now? Where did they go? There's a number of things. Unemployment is very low. So it's not just the pandemic. There are other forces at play. One thing that I learned that's really interesting is when you think of the start of the pandemic, so 2020 and 2018, we had the legalization of the use of medical marijuana in our state. Takes industries a little bit of time to get up and rolling. So really that industry started picking up during the time of the pandemic. And we had 45,000 people that are now working in that industry that weren't working in that industry before. And I see some heads nodding in the room. A lot of times we think, well, those are people from out of state. Not really, 2% of them. So 45,000 people that were working likely restaurant, retail, maybe some low-skilled manufacturing positions that have went to a whole new industry. So that's one component of this. Worker expectations are changing, and we'll dig into that more as well. Some myth busting. I hear a lot of times people will say, well, people just don't want to work, right? They're on unemployment, they don't want to work. But we've seen the labor force participation rate rebound back to where it was before the pandemic. So the blue line that you're looking at here is the national average. The green line is the Oklahoma average. Obviously, we saw a big dip at the time of the pandemic, but we're back to pre-pandemic levels just about with our labor force participation. That means how many people within our state are participating in the workforce. So we can't really blame that either. I mean, people are in general back to work, but there's other influences that are at play. So what really prompted this study? These issues have been going on for a while. We started conversations with the state last summer, and then Jim Priest, who is the CEO of Goodwill Industries of Central Oklahoma, he reached out to me and said, hey, I'm trying to start a think tank group. All these employers are trying to figure this out on their own. Everyone's, having people outside with signs saying $15 an hour. What if we try to work together? And between those conversations with the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission, I always have to look at the name. I mess it up every time. The three of us joined forces and really launched this study in December of last year. So the data you're going to see today is from December and January when we actually did this study. But I have to give you a caveat. This is 6 months ago, and the pendulum's starting to swing back in the favor of employers again, right? We have inflation is really high. We have worries and concerns of a recession. So I have to give that disclaimer. This stuff changes very quickly. So we have to be careful of not overreacting and not underreacting and being mindful of what the current landscape is. All right. So the 4 big takeaways from our study: culture is no longer a nice to have. My background's human resources. I worked in human resources for a while. Culture was always that really fluffy, nice to have thing at the cool companies, but that's not the case. We all need to be talking about culture. Flex and hybrid work options are really kind of non-negotiables now. Employees got a taste of that flexibility and they don't want to give it all up. So we'll talk about how we can do that with just about any job. Wages and buying power. And then I won't spend a ton of time diving into this, but we had a lot of concerns around COVID at the time of doing this study. Keep in mind that was around when Omicron was really spiking up. So there was a lot of people that had concerns about either getting exposed at work or they had concerns around vaccine mandates. So I want to note that we won't spend a ton of time, but as we see cases spike in your organization, you may be thinking, okay, how can we ensure that people are comfortable and people have what they need to feel safe at work? So being mindful of that. I'm going to fly through some of these because I'll give you a link and you can go through all the study and the charts and everything you want. I'm just going to really hit the high notes. So if I'm clicking fast, you're going to have access to all of this and can go back and look in more detail. We had 1,200 people respond. Out of those, 46% were employed full-time, 33% were unemployed. We got really lucky and we had a large sample of our unemployed workers thanks to the state of Oklahoma and partnering with those unemployment offices. They really helped get our survey out to those different groups. So every single slide that I'm talking about data, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the exact population I'm talking about and exactly how many people answer that question. Some of the groups are small, like our retiree population. We only had about 22 responses there, but I still think there's some helpful data there. Just be mindful of how many people responded. So this is how many people have been looking for employment. This is our unemployed population. The big takeaway is that people haven't been on the job market that long. Most of them, it was under 6 months. I think sometimes we have a perception that, you've been unemployed for a really long time, but that wasn't the case for most people. We also saw that most people were unemployed on an involuntary basis. So they were either furloughed or let go or fired from their work. We only had 14% that actually quit their job. Why did you quit your last job? So when we looked into those that did quit, we saw abusive and poor work environments cited a lot. That's kind of a non-negotiable, can't happen anymore. If you've got a supervisor that isn't treating employees right, it's time to really address that, because it's easy to go find another place to work now, right? So abusive environments, poor work environments, that came up a lot. And I hope as a state, we can really work to address those and ensure that we all enjoy where we go to work. So culture is no longer a nice to have. We've heard that term emotional intelligence. Think of culture as almost emotional intelligence for your organization, but it has to happen at that executive level, right? You have to have CEO buy-in, you have to have president buy-in to really show that it's something that you care about. It has a wide ranging implication for a number of things. People feel like they belong to a community, they have to feel respected. All of these things are having a really big impact on retaining people at work. But also, it's really important to ensure that your cultural inclusion efforts are mindful of all diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically generational awareness now. So I have a short video to share with you.
Did I get the job?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because you're a baby boomer and I am a millennial.
Well, Melanie, I am overqualified for this job.
I don't know where you got this. We don't do paper applications.
I made it. I don't do the internet.
Okay, that is the third time you have said that this interview, and it also says so on this homemade job application.
There you go, champ.
I don't know what this is for.
Don't you need a trophy anytime you anything?
Oh, it's off. How'd you get here? Horse?
I drove my car. I own it. After 8 more payments. How'd you get here?
I took an Uber.
Do not know what that is. I bet you're a vegan.
Yeah, because I'm not a monster. Look at who you guys voted for.
Yeah, that's right. I voted. This is the only way you'll ever own a house.
Learning how to text is the only way you'll ever communicate with your son. So,
All right, guys, who took my Sheryl Crow album?
Gen X. You know what?
I quit.
Dad!
I had a feeling you might like that video. And there's some realities in that video. Something that came up was not understanding different generations that well, right? And treating older generations differently versus younger generations. And so I love that. I'm a millennial. You can make fun of me all you want. I've been making fun of my own generation my whole life. But I really like that video. It hits on some things. Okay, so I'm going to just hit on a couple other things. What keeps you looking from a job? Again, this is our unemployed group. Concerns about being exposed to COVID at work was a really, high up there response. But look at that next one. I know it's tiny. It says costs associated with starting a new job, clothing, fuel, expenses. That's gotten worse since we did that study, right? So that's even more of an issue that we're seeing now for employees. What would make you feel better about coming back to work? Job security, and then flexible schedulings were really high up there on the list. when you hear me say the words hybrid, flexible scheduling, I think a lot of times we immediately go to remote work. That's not what I'm talking about. There are some jobs that can be done remote, right? But we've seen a lot of jobs even in manufacturing that you can get more flexible with. So when you hear me say that, don't immediately go to remote, because there's a lot of jobs that can't be done remotely, right? We have to be there for work. What are you wanting most in a job? I would say if there's one thing that was the biggest takeaway for me in this study, it was this slide right here. So these are unemployed individuals. A livable salary was obviously number one, but look at number 2 and 3. Number 2 is flexible scheduling. Number 3 is healthcare. That's huge, because the first thing I work for is the money to support my family. The second thing I work for is healthcare. Beyond the things that I love about my job, the tangible take homes that I need healthcare. And the fact that flexible scheduling is tied with healthcare, that's huge. If you slice this data by gender and we just look at females, the flexible scheduling goes up even more, right? If they're having to bear more of the child taking responsibilities in their home. What's most important to you in a job? These are people that are unemployed, that are not looking for a job. So we can assume this is a large portion of people that may be single parents, or maybe people that have some sort of medical condition that's not enabling them to work at that time. And again, we're seeing a big proportion of that flexible scheduling come up. Okay, this is interesting. So this is a retiree population. Again, this is a small population. There was only 22 people. We're actually doing a follow-up study on the 55 and older workforce, and I hope we can dig more in. But when we asked the question, would you consider a job with flexible hours or a schedule? 50% said, yeah, I'd actually consider coming back to work if I had a flexible schedule. I know in the business school, we have a career coach who I've worked with for many years. He is incredible. And he's getting to that point where he wants to retire. And I'm like hanging on for dear life. I don't want to let him go. And he just transitioned to a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday schedule. And so he gets Monday and Friday off. He doesn't have to be on benefits anymore because his wife is working. He can be on those benefits. So we're saving the benefits costs there. But I might be able to hang on to him for a few more years because we have that flexible option. I don't know if we ever would have considered that before the pandemic, if I'm being honest. It's always you work full time or you don't work, right? And so having more flexible options, especially for our retiree population, it's a big generation, the baby boomers. We want to hang on to them as long as possible. And that's one way we can do it. Here's where it gets a little interesting. These are full-time people. So people that are currently working full-time, 45% said they are considering quitting their jobs within the next 6 months. This is the Great Resignation. And this was what it looks like for our state. So 45%, that's a lot of people. And when you asked them why, wanting a job with a more flexible schedule was number one that popped up on the list of what they're looking for. Flexible scheduling, it's all about that. So let's talk about what that means. Workers have seen, well, I showed you that I was able to do my job differently. I showed you I was able to do it more flexibly during the pandemic. Why can't I have that now? And getting, creative of how we can make that work. But before you do that, you have to have trust inside your organization and accountability. If you don't trust your employees to get their job done, or you don't think they're going to be accountable, that's not a flexible working issue. That's a management issue, right? Your employees have to be able to be accountable to meeting those expectations. So just a real quick personal story for me. I'm a runner. I don't really like running, but I've learned to like it over the years. I've been running for about 15 years, but for the first 10 years of my career, I worked in oil and gas and manufacturing that had really strict schedules of, 7 to 5 in the office. I don't run in the dark because it's just kind of a safety thing for me. So I only ran 2 days a week, Saturday and Sunday. And that was just my schedule. Well, during COVID, that changed for me. And I got up every morning. I'd work from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. at home. Nobody emails at 5 to 7 a.m. So I could get so much done. And then I'd go for a run because it would be light outside. And then I come back and I get into the office around 9 o'clock. I'm putting way more than the 40-hour work weekend, but I'm able to do it differently. And I can run about 5 days a week now. And that does a lot for my own mental health. I enjoy it. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I'll give it back. I want to keep, running multiple days a week. I don't know if I would go back to a required 7 to 5 where I couldn't do that. That's just my own personal story. Unemployed people, let's talk quickly about wages. Obviously, that's a big thing. The federal minimum wage, $7.25. It hasn't been increased since 2009. Very few people are paying the minimum wage. We're seeing employers have to really catch up to be competitive. But keep in mind, since it's been so long since we've had that increase, now we're having to catch up wages and we have inflation. And it's created this perfect storm of how do we pay enough while also being competitive with the current environment that we're in. And then I'm going to skip through some of these, but physical and mental health came up quite a bit of concerns of people why they may not be working at this time. And then some other themes that we saw, age discrimination came up a lot. We did a couple of news interviews after this. I had a 64-year-old electrical engineer from Enid, Oklahoma, contact me, found my email address, and said, "Thank you so much for digging into age discrimination. I've been trying to get hired for 3 years, and everyone says I'm overqualified." And then we had about 2 or 3 other individuals that reached out with the similar stories. So we're doing an age discrimination follow-up study because I think it's happening much more than what any of us are willing to admit. And again, we've got to retain the 55 and older workforce. They're a huge opportunity with the issues we're seeing. Let's see, lacking confidence to re-enter the workforce, and then also recruiting processes being really clunky. I don't know about you, I work in career readiness. I still don't like writing a cover letter. Are you making your employees jump through unnecessary hoops? A lot of people would say in the study, I spent 4 hours applying for a job and no one even told me yes or no. I never heard from them. And that's not very nice, right? We at least owe them a yes or a no. So there are a number of things that you can be thinking about. I would say the biggest takeaways that I'd recommend: A, look at your recruiting processes, take out any clunkiness that doesn't have to be there to get people. Next is start to look at recruiting specialized populations. Are you a second chance employer? So I'm curious, do we have any second chance employers here in the room today? Meaning that you consider candidates that have been justice involved. Okay, if I come back in a year, I hope I see more hands in the air. Second chance employment is a huge opportunity. There was one individual that specifically quoted, they had a felony from 20 years ago. They've gone back to school. They have a college degree. Still, no one will hire them because of that felony. And so being a second chance employer is another big opportunity. Individuals with disabilities, veterans and active military, that manufacturing company in Aon, they've hired 100 of the Afghan refugees that have come to our state. I think by the end of last year, you might be able to help me with this, or the end of February or March, we had around 1,000 families that came to Oklahoma that are Afghan refugees, and they found a way to hire them. They made religious accommodations. They got them transportation to work. That's another specialized population that we can certainly take advantage of. These are just a number of things to be thinking about. I wish there was a silver bullet to say, here's the one thing you can do to get all the employees that you need, but that's not the case. There's usually a lot of different things that tie in, and I'm happy to talk a one-on-one about any of this later on down the road. This is a book that I recommend to anyone that will listen about thinking again. So if you think that, well, this won't work for our organization, we do this, we do that. This is Adam Grant. He's one of my favorite authors. He has all these funny charts. It says the most annoying things people say instead of rethinking. That will never work here. That's not what my experience has shown. That's too complicated. Let's not overthink it. And that's the way we've always done it. So don't find yourself caught saying one of these things when trying to rethink how your organization is work. Because we're seeing a lot of companies start to not just, say, okay, we'll do virtual work, but they're doing experiments inside their company. They'll do an experiment and they'll say, okay, let's try out hybrid with this portion of our workforce, and then let's test it. Let's survey them. Let's see how it worked. Let's look at their productivity. So lots of things that you can do there to really rethink how your organization is working. So the status quo for how we work has been shattered, but I'm hoping that we can lead the way together in Oklahoma. I'd love to see us lead the nation in Oklahoma on how we're rethinking work. And coming July 2020, later this month, they'll have an opportunity to hear from the employer side. So we've talked to employees about what they need, but I want to hear from you. So we'll be launching a study later this month to hear from employers on your side of the story of what do you need? What do we need to be providing you so that you have everything you need to be successful? This QR code will take you to the whole study. If you want to go through every qualitative comment, you are more than welcome. And that's all there. So with that, I hope we left some time for questions, about six minutes for questions. So I'll take any that you have. Yes, sir.
Mentioned childcare as an important issue. Is it or isn't it?
It absolutely is. Thank you for bringing that up. I've heard some really cool things happening out in the panhandle of Oklahoma. I wish I knew the company, but I'll find out. They're incorporating mommy shifts. So in rural Oklahoma, the statistic I heard that is only 1 out of 10 daycare spots that are needed are available. So even moms or parents that want to work can't because there's no daycare. And so companies are incorporating mommy shifts, which means you go to work right after school starts and you get off work right before school lets out. That's a really cool, innovative thing that doesn't require, a lot of extra thinking to incorporate so that we can get parents back to work. That's a great question. Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to what I call brain drain, meaning the majority of Oklahoma students, high school, go to university or college in the state of Oklahoma, but often they leave our state after they graduate. Is that a major issue that you see also?
Yeah, I can't say that it came up specifically in this study, but when I poll students and say, what's your top city to go to? Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and Dallas, Texas are tied for first place. So yeah, we see a lot of good talent leaving our state. We do, I think 30% of our student population comes from the North Texas area. So some of that is going back, but we have an opportunity to retain our talent here in the state. And I'll also say I have 2 friends that live in a neighborhood close to me. They are contributing to Stillwater's community and economy by living here and buying things, but they're employed virtually by companies outside of our state. And so we're seeing that more and more come up as well. So these are all things that we need to be taken into consideration. Good. Other questions?
I guess have seen instances of, even though in Oklahoma we have a lot of opportunities to get these funds expunged with all the 1819 process, are you still seeing these potential employees still having trouble getting employed, even though there's a lot of ways to expunge that from the record?
I'm not an expert on how to expunge it, but I can tell you it came up a lot in the study that people said they're not being hired because of a criminal background. So I would say, yes, it's still a big barrier to entry for them, or at least they think it is. No, we never asked that in the study, but there's good organizations out there. But I asked that question, are you a second chance employer? I did it to a group of about 200 a few weeks ago, 200 employers, only 2 raised the hand. So I think there's an opportunity for companies to do more in order to be a second chance employer. Learn about that. Yes, sir.
This may be just asking you to repeat something that I didn't understand earlier about employers that do interviews with, yet and I've not my personal, but I've experienced or know of people that have done interviews. Someone has been hired, but they never hear back from the employer, not one comment. So what should those people that do that, should they continue to, hey, I haven't heard from you. Can you tell me what happened? What should happen there? Or what does that say about the employers that aren't following up with those that they didn't hire?
Yeah, I think our recruiting processes are pretty dehumanizing is the word that I give, because you put so much time, right, into that application, into that interview. Yes, they should follow up. Once they start ghosting you is the new term that college students use. When they stop returning your emails and phone calls, then at that point I would stop. But absolutely, I'd encourage them to follow up. And for all of you, look at your recruiting processes. Are you communicating to your applicants? Give them that closure of saying, not this position, but maybe another one, so that they might consider applying again. It's a great point. Yes.
Well, I think that ghosting can work both ways.
Yes,
too.
it does.
And that's a huge issue. We'll have, not anymore, but I hear, a job opening and get 10 applications, try to get 10 interviews and only 2 show up.
Yes.
And that's an issue. Where I was going to go with this is Elon Musk, about a month ago, said, you get back to the office or I'll assume you're going to go sit on someone else's dollar at your home. That was July 1. Have you heard anything about what happened there?
I mean, it's getting a lot of negative publicity for Tesla.
I knew that. Well,
Yeah.
so's these 2 twins he just fathered. numbers
would
8
say-
and 9, but
Look at Amazon. Amazon's had a bad reputation of having a poor working culture for a number of years. And I would say just in the past year, it's really caught up with them, right? You've got all these unionizing attempts. Unionizing is something, I knew it from West Virginia because of the coal miners. We had a lot of unions in West Virginia. I thought they were the thing of the past. I don't like that people are trying to unionize again, because that means they're unhappy with their working environment and they're not getting what they need. And so I don't think that's going to work out well for him in the long term, because the Googles of the world are bending over backwards to give their employees that flexibility. And like I said, I would say I work more hours now than ever before in the pandemic, but I get my run, and that's really important to me. So that's just one, personal story. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Just a comment, not gonna offer this. But a number of years ago, I was an officer in a manufacturing company in Buffalo, New York. And when I was hired, I had to go through an interview with I used the word shrink, but it was basically an attempt to find out more about myself. And my ultimate employer's famous quote, he was a non-union shop of about 120 employees. And he was famous for his quote, "Any employer who gets a union deserves it." Now, that may or may not be true for most cases, but the shop, well-paid employees, happy employees, with the officers being out in the plant, seeing what was going on, a culture that was pleasant to work in.
Absolutely. I think that the goal is to have happy employees without someone having to negotiate on their behalf, right? Wouldn't that be great? Okay. Thank you all so much. Thank you.